The evening had that thick Tennessee warmth, the kind that made your skin feel like it belonged to the air. My parents' house was full, the long table stretched end to end with folding chairs added at the edges like an afterthought. Everyone was already halfway into their plates by the time I stepped in. Wade was at the center, laughing with a mouthful of cornbread, waving his hands like he was conducting an orchestra of charm. Everyone leaned in when he spoke, like proximity to his voice meant something. I sat toward the end, not quite at the kids' table, but close enough. "Thalassa, water again?" My mother, Velma, called from the head of the table. I smiled. "Just water." No one asked why. No one ever did. Then came the toast. Velma rose, glass of sweet tea in hand. "To Wade," she began, proud as a preacher. "You've always been the strong one, Wade. You lead this family." Everyone clapped. I didn't. I smiled, though. Because sometimes smiling is easier than explaining why you didn't. That smile, they always mistook it for agreement, for compliance, but it wasn't either. It was a placeholder, something to wear until the words I really wanted came together. Earlier that day, I'd wired over $2,000 to Wade's account. Again. Rent for Mom and Dad. With love, your daughter. I wrote that in the memo line every month. Never once got a reply. Not a thank you, not a check mark, not even a thumbs up emoji. Once I asked Mom if I should just send it directly to their account. She looked up from the stove and said, "Just send it to Wade. It's easier that way." Easier. I sat at that dinner table, pulled out my phone beneath the tablecloth, and scrolled. 36 transfers. No replies, no acknowledgements. Just silence, padded with comfort. Funny how easier turned into invisible without anyone noticing. Dinner rolled on, and Velma came around with a basket of napkins. Hand-folded like little daisies, the kind she used to make for holidays. She laid one gently on Wade's plate, kissed his shoulder. "Guest of honor today," she said. My napkin? Rolled. Bare. Placed like a utensil. People noticed. They smiled at the gesture. One of the aunts clucked. "That's love right there." I held mine loosely in my lap. Wade laughed, raised his glass, said something about family sticking together. I tuned it out. My thoughts were louder. Sometimes it's the little things, like a napkin or the silence after your name is skipped, that say the loudest truths. I didn't say a word, not because I was scared, because I was deliberate. It's been like this for years. Every time I offered help, they let Wade hold the receipt. Every win, he wore it like a badge sewn from my labor. And I just nodded along. But see, silence isn't submission. It's strategy. Let them talk. Let them toast. I was listening. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat with my laptop open, scrolling through bank records. Not out of anger, out of clarity. I began compiling, not for a fight, for truth, not revenge, just recalibration. As the night wore on, I went back to the kitchen to help clean up. My plate was untouched. Wade cracked another joke. Something about how women can't cook and save money at the same time. Everyone laughed. Again, I smiled. But this time, it wasn't polite. I woke up before the sun. The house was too quiet, the kind of quiet that meant someone was already up and trying to be quiet on purpose. I sat up in the bed I hadn't used since college and looked around the room. Everything was still there. The bookshelf with missing spines, the curtain with one panel shorter than the other, the yellow wallpaper my mom insisted was cheerful. It didn't feel cheerful anymore. It felt like a museum dedicated to someone I stopped being years ago. Voices drifted from the kitchen, low and familiar. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, but my name landed like a pin dropped on glass. "She's not as polished in real life as she is on Facebook, huh?" My aunt chuckled. Velma didn't laugh. She didn't correct her either. "She's just different," she said, soft but final. Different. That word again. I stared at the wallpaper like it might say something back. "I'm not different. I'm just not what they wanted." I slipped outside in a shirt too thin for the chill. The cold bit at my arms, but I needed air. I pulled my phone out of my pocket, scrolled to Mom's name, and tapped call. I just wanted to see. She picked up. Oh, hey, honey. Wade's calling on the other line. Let me call you back. The line went dead. I stared at the screen for a long time. She never called back. She never did. It wasn't the first time. There had been a dozen versions of that over the years. Texts left unread, voicemails ignored, messages seen but never answered. It used to bother me. I used to overthink every word, wondering if I'd said something wrong. Now I just understood it for what it was. A pattern. And patterns, once seen, are hard to unsee. I walked back inside, past the kitchen without looking in. The heat from the oven hit me in the face, but it didn't thaw anything. I moved through the house like I didn't live there, like I never had. By late morning, Wade showed up like he was returning from a war zone. Car keys jangling, phone pressed to his ear, voice just a little too loud. Yeah, circle back with me next week. Tell Jason we're not moving on that until Q4, he said to no one who needed to hear it. Mom rushed over with a fresh plate of biscuits. Wade, sit down. I just made your favorite. Dad laughed at some offhand comment about startups with no plan, and Wade grinned like a man who never needed one. He patted my shoulder as he passed me in the hall. Still doing that finance thing? I nodded. Still pretending to be in meetings? He didn't hear me, or maybe he chose not to. My phone buzzed. Maris. How's it going? I stared at the screen, then slid it back into my pocket. Not yet. After lunch, I found myself alone in the kitchen again, elbow deep in suds, scrubbing dishes I didn't dirty. The sink water was too hot, but I didn't adjust the tap. It wasn't about the dishes. It never was. I thought about how often I fell into this, moving through their mess like it was mine to fix. Not out of love, but out of muscle memory. No one asked me to wash anything. No one had to. Sometimes the problem isn't what they do. It's what I never stopped them from doing. I dried the last plate, set it down carefully, and looked up at the hallway mirror just beyond the kitchen. My face was clean, but I still felt stained. I whispered to my reflection, next time he calls, I'm not answering either. It wasn't bitterness. Not anymore. It was the beginning of something different. Not revenge, just self-respect. Sunday morning slipped in through the trees like it always had. Quiet, steady, too familiar. I laced up my sneakers and left the house before anyone stirred. I didn't need breakfast. I needed space. The sidewalks curved through the old neighborhood like a memory you keep walking into. 2 kids were riding scooters up the hill, their mom trotting behind with a coffee in one hand and a sweatshirt in the other. She yelled something about helmets, and they groaned in unison. I smiled, just barely. Then I felt it. That pull in my chest. Not from longing, from remembering. The first time I wired money to help my parents, it wasn't because they asked. It was because they didn't. They were behind on rent. Wade had forgotten to send it. I sent it before they even told me. No one said thank you. That's what made it worse. Later that afternoon, I was back in my place in Nashville. I kicked off my shoes, poured a glass of water, and sat down at my desk. I didn't open work emails. I opened something else. A folder on my desktop titled For Them. Inside, every transfer I'd ever sent. PDFs, screenshots, digital notes. October, meds. November, property taxes. December, groceries and plumbing repairs. There were dozens of them. Every note tagged the same. For rent, love, tea. Not a single reply in return. Not an email. Not a call. Not even a text that said, got it. I kept scrolling. One transfer showed Wade forwarding my message to Dad. Sent from me this month. He didn't even change the wording, just passed it along like a gift-wrapped lie. How many times had I done that? Sent money, sent help, without asking for anything back, and watched someone else collect the applause. It didn't happen all at once. It happened in increments. $1 here, a moment there. Eventually, they stopped seeing it as help and started calling it her duty. No one stole from me. I gave it. But they took the credit anyway. And I let them. The sky was turning pink when I drove back down to Murfreesboro for dinner. I wasn't staying, just dropping by. They were hosting something small, a neighbor's retirement or church committee, I don't remember. I stood in the living room while Velma gave someone a tour of the new framed wall. She pointed out photos like she was listing trophies. One large frame caught my eye, taken during Dad's retirement party. I remembered that photo. I set up the tripod, hit the timer, ran into the shot, and in the print, my face was cropped out. "Why'd you cut this version?" I asked, casually, almost like a joke. Velma didn't flinch. "You look tired in that one." I nodded. "Right. They always picked the version of me that suited their story." After they all shuffled outside to prep the grill, I stayed behind, sat on the couch under that photo, staring at the corner where my shoulder barely made the frame. Just a piece of fabric, not a person. The camera that took that picture, I bought it, used my end-of-year bonus, wrapped it in a red bow, gave it to Dad with a smile and shaky hands. I thought he'd say something, that he'd notice. He just said, "Hope it's got a zoom." Not ungrateful, just uninterested. Now my face was gone from the wall, and no one seemed to notice it had ever been there. I didn't cry. That part of me was done. I pulled out my phone and opened my bank app again, scrolled to that folder. I tapped rename, changed it from for them to for me. I used to think they just forgot to thank me. Now I wonder if they ever even saw me. Dinner was quieter than the night before. Not because there were fewer people. The house still held voices, footsteps, the clinking of dishes, but the noise didn't reach me this time. I was there, but not part of it. We'd just finished the roast when Velma pulled out a small wrapped box from the buffet. "Look what Wade got us," she said, holding it up like a prize on display. "It just arrived today." The wrapping was familiar. Simple craft paper, dark green ribbon, a small card tucked under the knot. I felt it before I saw it. She opened the box carefully, pulling out a sleek digital photo frame already running a loop of family memories. Dad's retirement party, Wade's high school football game, the church picnic. None of them recent. All of them carefully chosen. "He always thinks of the sweetest things," she beamed, nudging Dale, who grunted in agreement. Wade smiled like someone who'd just received a standing ovation for reading someone else's script. "I knew that frame, not because of the pictures, because I bought it 3 months ago. Ordered it. Selected those exact photos. I'd recorded a note to the vendor to preload them, even added my name to the file metadata. I hadn't told anyone. It was supposed to be a quiet gesture, something meaningful. Instead, it arrived here, wrapped the same way, but with a different card. One signed, "From Wade." He didn't flinch, didn't stumble over the lie. It slid out of him like he'd rehearsed it. I didn't say a word, not yet, but something shifted in my chest. Later that evening, I stepped past the kitchen, headed for the porch when I heard Velma's voice from around the corner. She was on the phone. I could tell by the rhythm in her speech, the performative tone she used when talking to old friends. "Oh, Wade's the one who keeps this family going," she said, like it was the most natural truth in the world. "I don't know where we'd be without him." Then a pause. Laughter. And the next part, sharp as glass. "Thalassa, she's just there. She has her own life. Just there. Not unhelpful, not selfish, just there." I didn't interrupt. I didn't storm in. I stood in the hallway and let the words burn through me like slow acid. You can argue with hate, but what do you do with erasure? I stepped outside, let the door shut behind me softly. Wade was sitting on the porch swing, scrolling through his phone, thumb flicking like he was too busy for real life. I sat down beside him, not close, not far. "Do you even realize," I asked, "you're letting them give you credit for everything I do?" He glanced at me, squinting a bit. "What's the difference?" He shrugged. "It all stays in the family." That was it. That was all he had. I stood up, looked through the window at the living room wall, the photo display. None of those pictures were mine, not the ones I took, not the ones I loved, only the ones they'd chosen. The ones where Wade was in the center and I was at the edge, or cropped out altogether. They didn't just misunderstand me, they'd rewritten me into a version they could stomach. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't slam doors. I walked back inside and began collecting the parts of myself I could still reach. A book I'd gifted Dad 2 Christmases ago, untouched, pages still stiff. A scarf Mom said she'd wear to church. Never did. The frame, still blinking soft transitions from photo to photo. I unplugged it without a word. It was subtle, controlled. But inside, I was done handing over my presents like a donation. Before I left, I opened the empty box the frame had come in, slipped a small card inside. It read, "Just remember, the version you love was built with money you never asked where it came from." I stayed up that night longer than I meant to. The house had gone quiet, TV off, doors shut, lights out in every room except the kitchen. I didn't want sleep. I wanted clarity. I sat at the kitchen table with the overhead light humming low above me, pulling out a worn folder from the bottom of my bag. It had been tucked under travel receipts and a box of Band-Aids, almost like I didn't want to admit I kept it on me. Inside was a copy of Mom's household ledger. I'd scanned it 2 years ago to help her organize bills digitally. She never used the file, kept scribbling on the physical version like it was gospel. I skimmed the latest entries. Wade, $0 thalassa, will pay back eventually. I stared at that line, not at the dollar signs, but at the assumption that I was a given, not a gift, that I owed them some undefined debt just for being steady, just for not being a problem. My chest didn't hurt, not exactly. It went numb, like the feeling you get when your fingers fall asleep but in your rib cage. I whispered into the air, no one around to hear. I'm a line item with a payment plan. Monday came with sun cutting through the kitchen blinds. I hadn't left the table all night, just shifted in place like a statue trying to remember it was made of skin. By late morning, Velma invited her friend Nancy over to drop off a casserole dish from Sunday. I stayed back, wearing an old hoodie, unshowered, mind still fogged. Nancy walked in, smiled wide, looked straight at me and said, "Oh, are you the housekeeper?" I froze mid-step. Velma chuckled, soft, almost like a hiccup, then changed the subject without correcting her. Nancy eventually apologized, said she felt so embarrassed, and I just smiled and said, "Don't worry, it happens." But inside, I didn't feel overlooked. I felt erased. Not just because of her mistake, but because of how normal it had become. By early afternoon, I'd driven back to Nashville. My apartment felt smaller than usual, not because it was cramped, because I'd just spent 2 days in a place where I didn't exist unless I was useful. I sat at my desk, phone in hand, scrolling through silent text threads when I called Maris. She answered fast. "You all right?" I didn't answer her. I just exhaled. She waited, then said, "How long are you going to keep showing up for people who don't see you?" I still didn't say much. She pressed, "You don't owe them a life sentence just because they raised you." I'd heard versions of that before, from friends, therapists, books. But hearing it from someone who actually saw me? Different. I ended the call. No goodbyes, just the kind of silence that means you're thinking too hard to talk. That night, I found an old notebook in the bottom drawer of my nightstand. Still had creases on the corners and coffee stains near the spine. I hadn't journaled in years. I flipped to the first blank page and wrote one line across the top. What would happen if I stopped? The pen trembled a bit in my grip. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was something else. I thought back to the first time I paid a bill for them. They were behind. Wade had forgotten again, and I called the landlord without telling anyone. Covered the entire month. Sent the receipt to Mom. No thank you. Just silence. Then expectation. And I let it happen because silence felt safer than rejection. At least when nobody says anything, you can pretend it was love. I stared at the words I'd written. They looked final, like a door I was about to walk through. One last line, bold, unapologetic. Tomorrow, I'll say something I've never said before. I was pouring my second cup of coffee when Velma slid a manila envelope across the kitchen counter. "Before you leave, hun," she said, like she was handing over a grocery list. "Just need your signature here. Wade's gonna help manage the place locally." I blinked, one hand still gripping the mug. "What is it?" "Just an update to the lease," she smiled. "Formality stuff." I opened the folder slowly. 4 pages, legal format. My name crossed out in 2 places, Wade's name bolded and centered. It wasn't an update, it was a transfer. Ownership, rights, emergency contacts. Every legal reference that once tied this house to me, gone. Dale sat nearby, sipping his coffee like it was any other morning. Didn't flinch. Didn't even look my way. Velma leaned on the counter. We just thought it made more sense, with you being in the city and all. I read every line again. I didn't ask questions. I didn't need to. This wasn't about convenience. This was about control. And now that I wasn't needed, I was being erased. I took out my phone under the table and snapped a photo of the signature line. Then I signed it. Not because I agreed, but because sometimes when they expect silence, you give them documentation instead. Afterward, I washed my hands slowly, like that would rinse the part of me that had just been cut loose. Lunch prep started an hour later. Velma bustled around the kitchen while I set out plates. We need a photo of the boys, she said cheerily. For the church bulletin, I want something fresh. She handed me her phone. Just Wade and Dale, she added. I didn't blink. I took the phone, walked outside, positioned them in front of the porch like props. Wade adjusted his collar. Try not to shake this time, sis, Dale chimed in without missing a beat. She always cuts off heads in photos. They laughed, all three of them. I lifted the phone, held it steady, smiled as I clicked. But inside, I was still stuck on that paperwork, on my name being deleted like it never mattered. I'm always the one holding the frame. Never in it. After the picture, I walked back into the house without saying anything. My steps were quiet but deliberate. I went straight to the bathroom, locked the door behind me, and sat on the closed toilet seat with the phone still in my hand. I opened the photo, stared at the image. Wade and Dale, arms over Velma's shoulders, glowing with pride. I saved it into a new album I created on the spot. Title: Proof. They chose. Then I sent it to Maris with no caption at first, then added 3 words. This house was never mine. No reply came back, but none was needed. Back in the hallway, I looked around the living room one last time. The smells, the sounds, the picture frames, the space they filled without ever needing space for me. And I knew, if I ever needed a reason to stop showing up, this was it. I hadn't unpacked my suitcase. It sat by the door, half-zipped, like even it didn't want to be here. I moved around the apartment slowly, not from tiredness, but from a kind of heaviness that made everything feel thick. I was drinking reheated coffee, bitter and metallic, when the email from Maris came in. Subject line: You need to see this. I clicked. A forwarded message, originally from Velma, sent to a cousin I hadn't heard from in years. The body of the email was short, casual. That was the worst part. There was no tension in her tone. Just certainty. The lass is doing fine, she wrote. We've always had to put our hopes in Wade. I read it twice. Then a third time. I wasn't shocked, not really. But something in me buckled anyway. Not from impact, but from weight. Like the last beam in a structure you always knew wasn't sound. They didn't misunderstand me. They misused me. I read the rest. She doesn't need much. Girls like that, stable, quiet. It's boys that need lifting. She talked about Wade like he was some sleeping giant with potential, just waiting for a big break. She used words like visionary and risk-taker. Me? I was solid. Reliable. The kind of woman who doesn't rock the boat because she's too busy patching the holes. It wasn't angry. That's what made it worse. It was a kind of polite erasure. Sanitized, clean. It was the version of me that didn't bother anyone, because she didn't exist. I hit forward, sent it to myself with a new subject line, Exhibit A. Then I closed the laptop and sat in the silence, staring at nothing, until the room felt like it was watching me back. That evening, I tried cleaning. I opened the kitchen drawer, trying to declutter, something to reset my brain. That's when I found it. A birthday card tucked into an envelope. My handwriting on the outside. I remembered the ink. I'd used a dark green pen that skipped once near the bottom loop of the A in Mom. I pulled the card out slowly. It wasn't mine. The handwriting inside was different, slanted, messy, impersonal. Happy birthday. Love, Wade. He'd swapped it. I stood there, one hand on the drawer, the other gripping the fake note. He didn't just steal credit. He removed me from the act entirely. I sent a picture to Maris, She responded within a minute. "That's not your handwriting. That's his." I didn't reply. I just stood there, the cards still open, thinking about how deep the edits went. He wasn't just taking the applause. He was scrubbing me out of the story. I didn't cry. I didn't throw anything. I opened my laptop again, created a folder on my desktop. Evidence. Inside it, I began dropping everything. PDFs, screenshots, emails, receipts, gift logs, photos, messages, everything I'd ever sent, covered, funded, fixed. I didn't feel vindictive. I felt organized. They built their family narrative on my silence. Let's see how well it holds up under scrutiny. When I finally stopped, it was after midnight. My back hurt. My eyes were dry, but my hands were steady. I stared at the glowing screen for a long time, the cursor blinking at the top of the file list. Then I whispered to myself, "You erased the wrong daughter." Saturday night came with too much noise and too little meaning. Velma called it a celebration of family unity. She even printed it on the invitations. That alone should have told me everything. When I arrived, the dining room was covered in pictures, laminated, framed, displayed. Wade in his football jersey, Wade in his cap and gown, Wade holding a baby I didn't recognize. I scanned the walls and counted exactly one photo with me in it. I was blurry, in the background. They sat me at the far corner of the table, far from Velma, farther from Wade. I didn't protest. I observed. They built this table out of delusion, but I brought facts. Wade stood midway through dinner, glass raised. The room quieted immediately. Dale smiled. Velma beamed like she knew every word before he said it. "I know this year hasn't been easy," Wade started, "but it's reminded me what really matters. Family." Aunt Cheryl whispered something sweet. Cousin Robbie nodded like a bobblehead. Wade continued, "Some of us had to step up. Some of us had to hold things together." Velma added, right on cue, "We don't know where we'd be without him." The room hummed with approval. Dale didn't speak, but he nodded, slow and sure. Maris, standing near the hallway, caught my eye. Her look wasn't surprise. It was permission. Wade ended his toast with, "We take care of our own." That was the line. I stood, not abrupt, not theatrical, just firm. "Since we're celebrating the people who hold things together," I said, walking toward the front of the room, "let me show you something." I pulled my phone from my pocket, walked over to the TV mounted above the fireplace, and connected the screen share. The room hushed. My banking app opened. I tapped History. A list appeared, dozens of lines, each one. Rent, for Mom, Dad, $2,000. Rent, for Mom, Dad, $2,200. Rent, with love, T. Wade didn't move. I turned toward the table. "You clapped for him," I said. "But I paid for it. All of it." Silence thickened. Dale set down his fork. Velma blinked. Aunt Cheryl glanced toward Wade, then back to me. I tapped again, pulled up email threads, forwarded receipts, timestamps, memos. One email from Wade. "Hey, here's what I sent them this month." It was my transfer, my money, my note. Velma opened her mouth, then closed it. "You never told us," she finally said. "We thought." "You didn't ask," I cut in. "You didn't want to know." I tapped again, opened another tab, showed email after email. Did they get the money? I'd written to Wade. No reply, only silence. Every month. Silence that spoke louder than truth. Aunt Cheryl murmured, "I always wondered how he managed so well." "He didn't," I said. "He managed my silence." Nobody clapped now. Nobody lifted a glass. I closed the app, disconnected the screen, walked back to the table, but I didn't return to my corner. I sat down 2 seats from the head, across from Wade, in clear view of Velma. No one told me to move. No one dared. "You don't get to rewrite history," I said quietly, "when I'm still alive to tell it." The guest room smelled like old cedar and lavender sachets that had long given up. I laid there for hours after the sun rose, not really asleep, not ready to be awake either, just suspended. Down the hallway, the kitchen came to life, muffled voices, a few bursts of laughter, not natural, not careless, the kind of forced cheer that people use when they're trying not to mention the elephant still sitting at the table from last night. I got up, walked down barefoot, every floorboard creaking a little louder than usual. No one said anything. Some nodded. Most looked away. I reached for the coffee pot. Velma passed behind me without a word. Dale offered a half smile and a throat clear, the closest he ever got to a conversation. On the fridge was a sticky note with Maris's handwriting. "You did what they never expected. Stand by it." I kept my eyes on that note as I poured my coffee. Didn't blink. We sat at the table, quiet forks, clinking glasses. Velma finally said something, cutting through the silence with a knife dipped in sugar. "Girls like you are tough. You don't need much." It landed with a soft thud. Before I could answer, my cousin Melanie, the one who always stayed neutral, put her fork down. "That doesn't mean she should be erased," she said. Dale muttered, "Boys carry the family name. It's different." Different. I didn't raise my voice, didn't even change my tone. "Funny," I said, "how names can be carried by mouths that stay closed." Everyone froze. There wasn't an argument, just a long stretch of air filled with something heavier than silence. I caught Melanie's niece watching me from across the table. She didn't look away. I nodded once. She smiled, quick and small. Later that morning, I stepped outside to check my phone. Notifications stacked up, mostly silence disguised as alerts. Then I saw it, the Facebook group, gone. Well, not gone. I'd been removed. The new name. The Huxley Legacy. Profile photo, Wade and Dale shaking hands in front of the house like it was a passing of the torch. No message, no explanation. I texted Wade. "Removed from the group?" He replied 3 dots, then, "Must have been a mistake. I'll look into it." He never did. I took a screenshot and sent it to Maris. Her response? "That's not a group. That's a stage." They didn't want healing. They wanted restoration. Of the story they liked better. The one where I was useful but not present. I went upstairs, packed slow, methodical. Only what mattered. Back downstairs, I paused by the family photo wall again. Still not in any of them. I didn't cry. Just thought to myself, this was the price. I knew it. I still paid it. I left a sealed envelope on the kitchen table. Inside, a printed copy of my entire transfer history, labeled in red marker. Receipts you never wanted. I opened the front door. Outside, the wind was picking up, like even the air wanted to push me forward. As I stepped out, I heard Velma behind me, soft but pointed, speaking to someone else. She made her choice. I didn't turn, I just said low and steady, "No, I finally made mine." The award plaque weighed nothing in my hands, but it carried every ounce of what they never saw in me. I stood on stage at my company's quarterly ceremony, smiling, shaking hands, nodding through the flash of phones and polite applause. My name had been called clearly. Leadership in Crisis, Thalassa Penbrook. It wasn't just a formality. This was a real moment. Earned. I looked out over the room. Rows of coworkers, mentors, even junior associates I barely knew. Every face forward. Every face except the ones I wanted. Velma and Dale weren't there. I'd invited them. Sent the email weeks in advance, with details, a calendar link, even parking instructions. Velma replied 2 days later. "Wade's kid has a recital. We'll have to miss it." That was it. The clapping got louder as the host kept talking. I tuned him out, because all I heard was the echo of empty chairs. They always had something better to do, as long as it wasn't for me. Back at my apartment that night, I kicked off my heels and changed into a sweatshirt. The inbox pinged with new messages. One envelope icon sat bold near the bottom, from my bank. At first, I thought it was a promotion or balance update. It wasn't. It was a collections notice. I opened it, reread it, read it again. My name, listed as the guarantor. For a line of credit I'd never opened. I sat down slowly, phone in hand, called the number listed. They confirmed it clearly. "Yes, ma'am. Opened under this name, co-signed by you." My voice stayed calm. My hand shook. "Who opened it?" "Primary holder is Wade Huxley." My head leaned back against the wall, and the realization dropped like a second gravity. Years ago, one of those lease updates from Velma, I'd signed without reading it. Of course I had. I trusted them. They didn't just take my name, they used it as currency. The next day, I met Maris in her office with a folder full of bank letters, digital proof, timestamps, copies of everything. She didn't need long to flip through them. "This is textbook fraud," she said, matter of fact. "You could press charges." "I don't want revenge," I said. She looked at me over her glasses. "Then what do you want?" "Removal." She nodded. "We'll send a cease and desist today. Start a formal dispute with the bank. You'll be out of this before they can drag you back in." For the first time in weeks, maybe months, I felt like the floor beneath me belonged to me. Later that week, my cousin Brianna called. She never called unless something dramatic was brewing. "Hey," she said. "Just wanted to give you a heads up. People are talking." "About?" "Well, Wade's saying you're trying to ruin him, like, financially and emotionally. It's a lot." I didn't respond. Instead, I forwarded her a PDF of the debt notice and ended the call. They could talk. Let them. And the truth doesn't need defending. It just needs documenting. I opened my laptop, added a new folder inside Evidence, named it Debt Deception. On Monday morning, I got to work early. The lobby was quiet. Janitors were mopping, a receptionist arranging a flower vase, and there it was, hanging on the wall, my plaque, right above the Employees Who Inspire board. I stood there longer than I meant to, not out of pride, out of confirmation. They can keep the last name. I've already outgrown the legacy.